If I may have your attention, I think we'll get started. Thank all of you for maneuvering your way through the security lines and making it to this undisclosed location in the visitors center. And I want to welcome you to our discussion on the jobless recovery. I had a conversation just earlier with some very smart political people who told me that we shouldn't be using the term jobless recovery. So we can both use jobless recovery and what is clearly a job creation deficit. And I just, by way of introduction, I just want to touch very, very briefly on what I see as the political significance of this discussion and as a way of introducing the speakers. Over the past month, I think the battle lines of what will probably be the defining debate over the economy and over the Obama's first administration have been drawn in the media and press. On one side of that line, you see increasing concerns about the deficits and whether the Fed has an exit strategy from the extraordinary measures it's taken in expanding its balance sheet. And therefore, the inflation hawks and inflation worriers are out in force. And that path leads to an argument that we should be trimming back the stimulus, even canceling it, and that the Fed should begin to think about interest rates. And the path is ultimately one of what I call the austerity option. The other side of the debate, the side that I think that we're going to hear today and I think is very important for America's future, is that in essence that if we have any kind of recovery, it's going to be a serious jobless recovery. And a jobless recovery, not like the jobless recoveries of the 2001-2002 recession or even 91-92, but a much, much more serious situation that will undermine or negate the recovery itself, partly because it will complicate the deleveraging of the household sector because you won't have any income and wage growth with huge amounts of excess labor and unemployment and underemployment, but also will perpetuate the housing bubble crisis by, in a sense, the housing and banking crisis from turning what was until recently principally a housing bubble crisis now into increasingly an unemployment housing crisis as people lose their jobs, unable to keep up with mortgage payments, not just because the principal that they had in their house has gone down, but because they're losing jobs and incomes. Now, which side of this battle line, of this battle debate, this defining debate wins, I think will largely determine the shape of the Obama administration's first term and whether there will be a second term, but also America's future. Which brings us to our two speakers, because I think these two speakers, these two gentlemen that we will hear from will play a very important role if the side of concern about jobs, wages, and incomes and a real recovery is to prevail. On the far left is Leo Hindery, who is a managing partner at Intermediate Partners, who's been a CEO of AT&T Broadband and its predecessors, TCI and Liberty Media, the founder of the Yes Network for those who follow the New York Yankees. Leo chairs the Smart Globalization Initiative at the New American Foundation and has taken the lead in promoting what might be called a citizens movement to draw attention to the job creation deficit and the problems associated with job recovery. And within the Senate and Congress, I think there will be no stronger voice for these concerns, certainly based on the record he has since he's been elected since 2006, than Senator Sherrod Brown. And we're very honored and pleased to have the senator here. I think you're all familiar with the enormous contributions he's already made on healthcare issues, on wage and incomes, worker issues, and labor. The senator may have to leave a bit early in order to make it back to a markup of the bill, but he will speak first, and we're very pleased and honored to have him with us.
Cheryl, thank you, and it's good to be with all of you. Leo, it's always a pleasure to share a stage with you, except for the Yankee. They always bring up the New York Yankee part, and my children, I wanted two things. They didn't grow up to be Yankee fans or grow up to be Republicans, and they've done just fine. And Leo's influence notwithstanding, and Pat Malloy, Mike Lux, thank you for the good work that you do on all these issues. As Cheryl said, we're doing the middle of the healthcare markup today, so I want to stay around for a while and take a couple questions too, and certainly listen to Leo before I go. You know the numbers on what's happened to manufacturing in this country. You know how important manufacturing is as a ticket to the middle class for a whole lot of people that don't dress like this, that want that opportunity, people that go to community colleges, people sometimes that only graduate from high school, people that get 1- and 2-year and 3-year degrees that enable them to operate increasingly complicated manufacturing systems, but that when you look at the numbers in this country, that manufacturing is about 1/10 the workforce, almost half of the job loss in the last few years has come from manufacturing, and it's clearly under duress that it has not really been under in really since the times of World War II. Before World War II, since this is in the last 20 years, manufacturing share of GDP has declined 30%. The financial services share of GDP has gone up 30%. And you can just think about productivity and what that's contributed. You can think of the situation we're in now, but also think of what that's meant to our country and our economy. I'll be brief. I want to talk about five fairly short and five very important issues we need to address in manufacturing as Congress looks at a manufacturing policy. I think that President Obama, I spoke personally to President Obama a couple of weeks ago about manufacturing, about how important it is, certainly to my part of the country, Ohio and the Midwest, but it's how important it is to the East Coast and the West Coast. California is still the largest manufacturing state in the country. So it matters to our whole country, it matters to our national defense, it matters to our security, it matters to our economic security, it matters, as Cheryl said, about what's happened with foreclosure is now, as it always was in my state, it was less speculation. It's mostly about job loss increasingly, all of that, why that matters so much. First of all, I'll start with a real quick story. Oberlin College, one of the finest small private colleges in this country, about 10 miles from where I live, Oberlin College has the largest solar energy powered building on any college campus in America. About 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, it was built. When I went to talk to the builder of it, he said that all the solar panels were bought in Germany and Japan because we didn't have the capacity in this country to produce the solar panels that we needed. That's in large part because of tax policy, that the R&D tax credit, the investment tax credit, the energy tax credits, the production tax credits, whichever, were all short-term and unpredictable. And we need to build a tax system for manufacturing, which we have started to do, especially in wind turbines and wind and solar and biomass and fuel cells, especially to target alternative energy, a tax system that is predictable, so investors know if they invest in capital-intensive solar panels or wind turbines, their fuel cells, that they know that their tax advantage they get from that will last 5 or 10 years, not 1 or 2 or 3 years in that unpredictable way. We've seen what this change in the law. We've already seen things happen. Toledo, Ohio. This will surprise you. Toledo, Ohio has more solar energy jobs than any city in the United States of America. Cleveland, Ohio is about to have right off its shore in Lake Erie. We think this is going to happen in the next couple of years. The first wind turbine field in freshwater anywhere in the world. There are wind turbine fields in saltwater, but nowhere in freshwater yet. Second, we need to strengthen our component supply chains, partly through the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, an existing government program funded with about $100 billion a year every year, the Bush administration tried to eliminate it or scale it back by half at least. Every year, the Congress bipartisan has restored it. It helps local companies and communities around the country learn how to export better, learn how to be more energy efficient, learn how to save dollars on their healthcare plans, whatever. And we are expanding that in several pieces of legislation. We're working to expand that. I think we'll be able to do that. I recently introduced, as part of strengthening the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, recently introduced the Impact Bill, which will help communities, especially those who help transform companies that now are in the auto component and auto supply industry, which interestingly is the largest manufacturing industry in the country, is those companies that supply the auto companies, not the auto companies themselves, but the component manufacturers, to help them begin to move into alternative energy. If you can build gearbox, if you can build gears for a car, your company is pretty well suited to build gearboxes for wind turbines. If you make glass for windshields, you can with relatively low investment, but certainly having the skills, you can make glass for solar panels. And so the Impact Bill will provide $30 billion startup over a 2-year period, revolving loan. The government gets its money back as more companies dip into this for low interest loan and transform their companies into, many of them will stay in autos or at least mixed use or autos and alternative energy. Some will go fully into alternative energy. Third is matching dislocated workers with emerging industries through sector-based workforces training strategies. What the government has done for too many years is provided adequately, in many cases, sometimes less, but sometimes generously, for workforce investment, workforce retraining. But the efforts are too scattered. The efforts are rarely systemic and directed and focused. What our Sectors Act does simply is have local communities build their workforce investment programs, local businesses determined locally, local businesses, local unions when applicable, local community colleges and local workforce investment boards to decide what their community does best. If they're in South Carolina, maybe they train people to work in the tourism industry and hotel management and other things. If it's Toledo, Ohio, there may be solar energy, or it may be food processing, something else that's big there. If it's Columbus, it might be advanced manufacturing. If it's Dayton, it might be something having to do with aeronautics, because of Wright-Patt Air Force Base there and their history in building various kinds of components for airlines and the auto industry. But to be determined locally is these federal dollars that are used to allow local people and encourage and incent local people to come up with what they need to train workers to do these. Whether it's a 2-year community college or whether it's a 4-year degree or whatever it is, or it's postgraduate, to be able to take advantage of the new things in this new economy. Fourth is assisting economically distressed communities. There's a company in Wilmington, Ohio, called DHL. It's a packing company. You've heard of it. It's very much a national company. They, in the last year, have basically shutting down their company, their operation, their airport. It's the largest privately owned airport in the country in Wilmington, Ohio, southwest Ohio. Some 8,000 people will lose their jobs. They're in a small county, a county of about 30,000. That company is the largest employer in 7 different counties in that part of the state, the largest employer in 7 different counties. That is in our mind like a base closing. It's just as big as a base closing. And the federal government has something called BRAC that you probably know about that deals with base closings, but has a systematic way of responding to that base closing. The Department of Defense comes in, it helps people retrain, helps the local community figure out how to fund its schools as they've lost so much of their tax base, helps the local community figure out how to attract new businesses, and most importantly, helps those workers directly and their families who have lost their jobs. The Obama administration has been helpful in DHL with a BRAC-like model. We have legislation to sort of codify that so that whenever there's major job loss in a community, that the government can come in a way that's helpful to that community, getting the community and the people who have been most directly hurt get back on their feet. And last is what we do to promote exports and defend against unfair trade. Everything from the Export Assistance Center, which is a small Department of Commerce operation that helps small, particularly manufacturing companies, working with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership that I mentioned earlier, to help those companies figure out how to export. Companies like Procter & Gamble in my state don't need much assistance from the government in figuring out how to export. Smaller companies do. Getting licenses, figuring out all the complexities of exporting. Second, we need, as part of that, a very different trade and tax policy. There's an introduced in the House this week, right, Chris? And where we'll do a comparable bill in the Senate, which we did also last year. It's a bill called the Trade Act, which I won't go into detail, but will change the way that we practice trade in this country, more according to our national interest than an economics textbook that is proven not to work very well, as we have a $2 billion trade deficit every single day in this country. And you know what that's brought us in terms of jobs and everything else that trade deficit has brought to us. So those are the 5 points I wanted to make in terms of sort of how we, in a proactive way, how we prepare for the future, not just reacting to the job loss in manufacturing, but how we build our communities and build manufacturing in this country. To make it, as I look at this audience and see a lot of people under 30, my guess is very few of you, if you're representative of your age group, think, I want to go into manufacturing when I get out of school. And I'm hopeful that we make manufacturing, particularly in things like alternative energy, interesting enough and exciting enough and world-changing enough that that's a pursuit that you decide for your lives. Thanks.
It's really always been a pleasure the last several years to be anywhere near the senator. And a colleague of mine who wishes he was here as well is Leo Gerard, who's the president of the Steelworkers. And Leo and I co-authored a piece that went up on the web last night about this issue. And it's actually out there. But nobody in the Congress, both House and Senate, has a better ability to develop prescriptions for this illness than the senator. It's a remarkable career and history in the Congress of attention to an issue. I think what is concerning the senator and I, and now increasingly so many others, is really, do we have a problem? Yes. Is it a big one? It's a monumental one. Is it one we need to worry about? Yes, it is. And are we doing enough to address it? And the answer, sadly, is no. Sherrod and the senator and these wonderful papers that are out there today will speak well about the issue. But let me just comment on a few issues. I think that it's highly, highly important that we understand the magnitude of the problem. This country, both parties, have for many years grown comfortable with not discussing the true unemployment in the United States. The women and men who are chronically underemployed, those that are part-time of necessity, those who are marginally attached, and those who have left the workforce out of frustration. Typically in the past, those people aggregated about a third of the official unemployment in the United States. That number is now equal. We now have 30.2 million American women and men who we define, the senator and I and Chris and others, we believe are underemployed or unemployed and need to be considered. The reason the number is so important is it's twice the official rate. We see unemployment, effective unemployment, approaching 20%, and we don't see the solutions in hand to bring that down. It's a genuine fork in the road where you can, in an economy that's as large as this one, in a country that's as geographically diverse, as wide, 3,000 miles in width as this one, you can technically rebuild this economy by re-enriching the wealthy. Or you can, in fact, address your concerns to the 150 million workers who don't comprise that top 1 to 2%, yet who are 20% unemployed, 30 million people, a base of 150 million. You're going to hear a lot over the next coming weeks about the slowness of the stimulus. That is clearly an issue. A lot of us think that it needs to be ramped up. But in truth, I think that the larger issue is that the stimulus plan, by the administration's own estimates, will create or save only 3.5 million jobs over the 2-year period of the stimulus that we're measuring the stimulus. That's 10% of the 30 million that I've described. It barely equals the women and men that have to find jobs just to keep up with population growth. and it barely equals the number of jobs that I think will be lost over the balance of this year into the first and second quarters of next year. And incidentally, nobody in this government actually keeps the statistic of a saved job. I don't know what a saved job is. I have a job, and I assume mine has been saved because I still have it. But when we hear these numbers, don't let them tell you about create and save. Tell us only about create, because we have 30 million who are counting on us to create. Another sort of cancer on the sort of a flesh-eating bacteria on this process and problem is that we have so much underemployment of the fully employed. The average worker in America today is working 33.1 hours. The average full-time worker in America is working 33.1 hours. We have seen cutbacks in hours and benefits that don't factor into any statistics. Part-time work, as we obviously know, of necessity at a record high. The senator spoke so eloquently about concerns of specific companies in the state of Ohio. There are actually about 282,000 manufacturers left in the United States. We think that is factors too few, but 90,000 of those 282,000 are gravely at risk over the next 24 to 36 months without a genuine manufacturing and industrial policy. You're going to hear the senator and others and I try to talk about that with a lot of purpose. And all of government, national, manufacturing, and industrial policy. As Sherrod mentioned in his introduction, we have, in my opinion, and I know the senators, a true jobless recovery going on. My God, they're gambling here. It's the movie Casablanca. You can't have taken the actions that we've taken in the past, the actions we're taking now, and be surprised that the recovery is in fact a jobless one. There is this danger, as Sherrod mentioned, that it is not resuscitatable. This is one that is highly susceptible to reverting back to even worse conditions. We know that about 60% of the bankruptcies at the personal level that are that are taking place in the United States this year are because of under and unemployment. The same can be said of the housing market. We can't resuscitate with this degree of under and unemployment. 31% of Americans, to their credit, now identify more than any other thing that's on the plate, and there are a lot of things. They say that job creation is their number one concern. They don't use create and save, I should tell you. I think the problem, as I've said, is this fundamental historical, and I don't by any measure blame this administration. It's a 4 administration long complete neglect of a manufacturing and industrial policy, and as Sherrod has mentioned, it has left us abysmally underemployed in manufacturing. Some countries, some very small financially based countries, can in fact survive without a manufacturing base. Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Singapore come to mind. We're not one of them. We can't survive without reinflating a bubble as the alternative, with just 12% of our GDP being represented by manufacturing industries, and we have no ability to survive with an average trade deficit in manufactured goods that persistently aggregates about $500 billion a year. I think there is some wrong-headedness going on by some who do not understand the nuance that the senator painted for you of the acute difference between one type of job and another. A job is not a job. We know, sadly, that service jobs are often lower paying. They add nothing to our export base, and even the ones that we have are chronically at risk, as we know. China and others, but especially China, certainly recognize what we're yet to recognize. In the midst of this economic global travail, the Chinese have actually been growing dramatically. Manufacturing jobs is their response to their concerns. We have been, as Sherrod mentioned, actually losing manufacturing jobs. It's a complete night and day solution. The I'll give you a couple of quick prescriptions. I think we need to pick winners. I think there's a reluctance in this administration, just intellectually and academically, to pick winners. I swear every other developed nation in the world, plus China, picks winners every day. The winner that we need to pick is the manufacturing industry, broadly defined to include the green side that the senator spoke about. The most immediate creator of jobs of a manufacturing nature would be a 10-year large effort aimed at rebuilding our infrastructure, not the short 2-year and sparsely funded effort we have underway. I and Leo Gerard and others believe strongly in a Buy American policy. I'm respectful of the burden of having such a policy be allowed under the rules of the WTO. But we heard just this past week of China's very outspoken interest in having its own Buy China policies, but refuses to acknowledge that we should have one as well. And we do have to find something to do with the youth of America over the very short term. I'm not going to speak about the trade policies. I think the senator does that better than I do. We talked about it a bit in the piece that we wrote. You can't fix this thing. You cannot fix this thing only with a manufacturing policy. You have to have reformed trade policies. They have to concentrate on China, not because we're trying to mute their competitive advantage or their comparative advantage. We're simply trying to ask for fairness when it comes to subsidies, currency manipulation, and environmental practices and labor practices, particularly as it affects the youth. We can't rebuild this economy sustainably by re-enriching the wealthy. We're headed that direction. I think we took a bad fork in the road. Another good quarter or two out of Goldman Sachs, a resuscitated quarter out of the Bank of America or Citibank, and we will declare this recession over. And I promise you those 30 million women and men that we are concerned about will feel like we let them down. This recession will not be over for them without the prescriptions that the senator outlined for you. And we sure appreciate, I know he and I and my pal Leo Gerard, your interest in this issue. I think Cheryl will want us to do some questions, but thank you for the privilege.
Thank you, Leo, and thank you, Senator Brown. Danny Mandel has a microphone. A housekeeping rule. This is being filmed for later webcasts, so by asking a question, you're in essence agreeing to be filmed and broadcast across the nation. And because of Steve Clemens' enormous communication network, it does get picked up by an enormous number of people. If we want to rebalance the room, there's standing room over here. If you all feel too crowded and cramped back there, it may be more humane. Danny has also kindly given up his chair up front, so maybe we can make it a bit more comfortable for some of you if you would like. It's really comfortable right over here. The senator has about 12 minutes, I think, or 10.
I don't even have like that.
Okay, so we'll take questions. Mike Lux. If you could identify yourself and stand up for purposes.
I'm Mike Lux, Progressive Strategies, and I do a lot of blogging on Huffington Post. I wanted to ask about the trade issue, namely how we win. It seems like obvious fact that the elite media is completely in bed with the so-called free traders and pushes their line no matter what comes up, even if it's a Buy America piece of legislation that every other industrialized country has, no matter what the issue is. Anything that even hints of a more progressive policy on trade is immediately attacked as protectionist and dismissed. And I'm wondering if the senator and Leo have thoughts about how we break through that media bias and how we actually win on this issue.
I think it's an easy answer. That we have never asked for anything but fairness and equal and equal sort of conduct. I think the time to do it, Mike, is with the upcoming confirmation hearings on the ambassador designate to China, Governor Huntsman. I think that's an opportunity to bring forward questions that will resonate beyond simply his confirmation. I was disappointed that the Secretary of Treasury went over to China recently, 2 weeks ago, and avoided these questions. Competitive and comparative advantage is not being disputed here. What's being argued is fairness. And it's simply on currency manipulation, illegal subsidy, and environmental practices that every man and woman in Ohio, they could compete well and ably if we would simply address those three things.
I would add that how astounding it was, Cheryl, I actually just talked about that before you asked the question, Mike, how astounding it was when we wrote some Buy America provisions. Senator Dorgan was the leader in that, and some others of us for the stimulus package, and how even though those were relatively modest Buy America provisions, they weren't as strong as many that certainly that Leo would have supported or that I wanted. They were solid, but they weren't as strong as we would have wanted. And the furor from the nation's newspapers shouldn't have astounded me because we've seen it every time. In fact, during the North American Free Trade Agreement debate in 1993, the largest newspaper in the country that opposed NAFTA was the Toledo Blade. That gives you an idea about the one-mindedness of the media. And so clearly, well, what's remarkable about trade to me, in writ large sort of, is that that even though virtually every newspaper supports every free trade agreement, almost without exception, the Harvard and Yale economists support these free trade agreements almost without exception, and the political elite in this country, the committee chairs and the presidents and the secretaries of Commerce and State overwhelmingly support these free trade agreements. The public still doesn't, no matter the fact that the information that gets to the public is very one-sided, and I don't normally accuse the media of that because I think the media generally does do its job as best they can, but on this one they don't. And even with that one-sided, even though they all sing with that upper class accent, trade, people are very skeptical about trade in our country. That doesn't answer your question how we're going to win it. We're going to win it because we're going to continue to educate people, and people are more and more aware of this. And it's what happens in China with Governor Huntsman's nomination, to what happens with any trade agreement the president brings forward, to what we're going to be able possibly to do on this Pakistan very small, something called RAS. What's it stand for, RAS?
Reconstruction Opportunity.
Reconstruction Opportunity Zone, something you might want to learn but might want to not learn, so it's not going to put anybody. But it's, I mean, even on something small like that, and the public gets this. It's a question of all the elected officials listening better than we have.
This gentleman.
Hi, I'm Colonel Dick Class. I am the president of VetBack, a Progressive Veterans Back, who also blogs on the Huffington Post. One of the issues we've taken up this year is the Employee Free Trade Act. And I guess my question is, how do unions play into the employment picture? The standard conservative line is that if you form unions, you lose jobs, which I don't think is true. But the question is, how does the Employee Free Trade Act in particular and the union issue in general play into the jobless issue?
Thank you. Thank you for your service to our country, too. And thank you for continuing to serve veterans. The Employee Free Choice Act is, I think we're going to pass it this year. We're in the middle of negotiations. Exactly what form, we'll see. All you got to do is look at productivity in this country in the last 30 years, and look at wages in this country in the last 30 years, and look at unionization rates in this country in the last 30 years, productivity and profits in this country in the last 30 years, and executive salaries. Executive salaries have gone up like this, profits have gone up, productivity has gone up like this, unionization rates have declined, and wages have been stagnant. And when I hear these conservative bromides that unionization is what costs us jobs, blaming the entire problems of the auto industry on what they say are $70 an hour auto workers. I haven't met one yet. There's a lot of auto workers, and none of them make anything like that. Basically blame the entire. So many of our problems on unionization is just so wrong-headed. The facts are that that when we've had high rates of unionization, we have a stronger, more vibrant middle class. We have more opportunity for people to work with their hands. My wife's first in her family to go to college. She went to Kent State. She, in those days, 30 years ago, graduated with $1,200 in debt because she was first in her family to go to college. Her mother was a stay-at-home mother until the end when she worked in a nursing home aide, but her father was a card-carrying union member at the local utility plant, and that provided barely enough to go to college. She got some loans and grants, but it was enough to send 4 kids to college and own a house and own a car, and that's why he was in the middle class, because he carried that union card, and I think that's just pretty clear to people that are fair-minded about it.
Tina, Chase.
David Chasen, OMB Watch, good to see both of you. I wondered if you could comment on the challenge announced yesterday by the United States with the WTO regarding China, and whether you see WTO as a reasonable forum for the United States to press trade fairness claims.
When I take that, then I've got to run. I apologize. Dave, thank you. Thanks for what you do, too. Good news yesterday. I mean, I think the president's acting affirmatively, and that's good with the WTO. I see a WTO, this is a bit off the subject, but I see the WTO in the next 5 years having to sort of reconstruct itself in this way, that we face with climate change, we face huge challenges in this country and obviously internationally. One of the biggest challenges, what do you do for the 5 or 6 industries that are most energy intensive? Glass, steel, chemical, cement, paper, and aluminum. And those 6 industries emit most of at least of the industrial CO2. They mostly come from those 6 industries. I don't know the percentage, but those industries also, interestingly enough, they're all 6 are in my state. All 6 of those often are in countries all over the world, because if you want to be a leading industrial power in any way, you have most or all of those 6 industries, certainly coal and certainly steel and glass and many of them. The only way we're really we need to pass this climate change bill. I think we will. It's going to be very difficult, maybe harder than healthcare. But we also, that's sort of the short and medium term answer. The longer term answer is what we do multilaterally dealing with these six manufacturing industries. And if we don't sign, and I've talked to Carol Browner about this at the White House, if we don't pass a multilateral 6 industry compact of some kind to deal with climate change and CO2 emissions and global warming, we simply can't address climate change the way we need to, no matter how good a bill we write this year, and I'm still hopeful we will. That's impossible without structural change in the WTO, I believe. I'm not a lawyer, I'm certainly not a trade lawyer, but I don't think that you can do it without changes in the World Trade Organization. I think the major countries of the world, free trade, orthodox fundamentalists that their leaders typically are, will understand we need those longer term changes.
Thanks. Thank you, Senator.
I'm going to add a quick comment on that. Thanks. I'm going to add just a quick comment on that while the senator walks out. The WTO, I think, would be imprudent for us to abandon the WTO. I think that we entered it in good faith, and countries of our magnitude should not revisit fundamental decisions like that. The WTO and the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, are chartered in both cases with looking at something called trade barriers, but that's not defined beyond people's expectation that it includes tariffs. An illegal subsidy and currency manipulation is no less a trade barrier to the unemployment morass that the senator was describing than a traditional tariff. And I think we stay in the WTO and we ask it and the USTR to think fairly about what a trade barrier is and to include subsidy and currency manipulation. Also, on the question that was posed by Colonel Klass about EFCA, the problem is not wages in the United States. It's about the comparative advantage. I'm not asking people to revisit the massive population of China and India as they compete against us. I'm simply asking, as the senator, that it be fair. I would close by saying that I do think a mistake would be made if we pursue Doha in the fashion we've suggested we wish to. One-size agreements don't fit all. We as the leading consuming nation in the world have a much greater obligation, in my opinion, to approach trade bilaterally, multilaterally, on modest occasion. But this one-size-fits-all of Doha is a mistake. We will get devalued down to the least common denominator, and we won't improve our situation.
Right. Just to add an additional point, I think the point the senator was making about the 6 key industries that all major economies in some ways want to have suggests that you need an additional mechanism to be able to, he was dealing with it in the context of climate change, but otherwise I think we'll need some sort of mechanism that recognizes that all of these major industrial and post-industrial powers still want to retain these basic industries, so that you're going to have some shared notion of market sharing eventually in order to avoid these kinds of serious overcapacities on the one hand and dislocations on the other. But, yes, ma'am.
Ken Jarbo with Athena Alliance. Leo, could you talk a little bit more about the structural antecedents of this problem? This is, the senator mentioned, this is not a new problem. This is a 30-year, on the unionization part, a 30-year decline. My own analysis of the recession shows that it shifted back in the 80s from a recession where you had temporary layoffs with the expectation that workers would be called back, to where you had actual structural change. People were fired and they weren't coming back. Could you talk a little bit more about how the current financial problems have exacerbated this problem, but they're longer-term structural antecedents?
Yeah, I think that really frames this afternoon's discussion. I said in the earlier comments that this is like the movie Casablanca, where we're feigning surprise that they're gambling in the casino. The comment is well made. This started in the early 80s. It was conscious, it was purposeful, and no one should feign surprise. We emasculated unions purposefully. We took away a voice at the very time when we were taking employees out of the constituencies to be tended to. We were adding management as a constituency onto itself. We exploded compensation in this country. I have a piece coming out tomorrow in the Financial Times that really calls this issue somewhat to task. I think it's the root of all evil, is compensation. It's the Willie Sutton problem. Why do you rob banks? It's where the money is. And I think the inattention to manufacturing, the attention to offshoring, the inattention to wage equality, the attention to income inequality is largely based on compensation run amok. I think there are 3 principles that need to be fought against at any time. One is we do need to pick winners because every other country does, but we don't. It's been a persistent, almost 30-year academic, intellectual premise that we should not pick winners. The other countries are. A job is not a job. And more recently, we cannot take down either our trade deficit or bring employment back to where it needs to be by some false premise that we can export services. A member of the administration just this week, when asked what could we export, he paid a great deal of attention, this is a senior official, to movies, to legal services, and to management consulting. I swear to God, China is not going to buy our legal services. They're going to continue to pirate our movies, and they're not looking for much advice from us on how to run an economy, because they're just running quite well.
Right, I have 2 questions. One there, and then Pat and Lloyd. Leo, I'm not sure the camera can actually see you, so you may
stand up.
You may want to.
I'm Lloyd Wood with the American Manufacturing Trade Action Coalition. We represent a significant portion of the United States textile industry. 3 very quick points. One, with the stimulus package, we're very, very concerned that the administration is eliminating the second part of the 2-part manufacturing test First part is the product assembled here? The second part of the test, do 50% of the components come here? And with the exception of iron and steel, they're eliminating the component part of the manufacturing test. 2, in your paper, very encouraged that you mentioned the need for some type of border adjustable tax to pay for climate change, healthcare, everything else out there. If you could elucidate on those comments a little bit more, that would be great. And third, it seems like the administration has a case of groupthink, that there's basically no manufacturing champion, with the exception of Jared Bernstein, who's on the vice president's staff, in the West Wing, in the president's key group of advisors. Do you see that changing, or is that problem going to persist?
I don't think, I'm going to take them somewhat in reverse order. I don't think we have an all of economy perspective. I think we are fixated on financial services and resuscitating, not even reforming the banks and the investment banks that caused this predicament. On average, that will lead us back to recovery. Well, as I said earlier, watch those 90,000 manufacturing companies fail. It will not address the employment issues that Cheryl and I and the Senator were talking about. I do think in a different context, we need to talk about border-adjusted taxation. I think we need to not stop at just incentives to keep jobs here and disincentives to offshore jobs. The fundamental change is a value-added tax that would be similar to that of our major trading partners in the developed side. We need to get there, and we need to get there fast. The stimulus bill for me was a acute disappointment. I decried small tax cuts for individuals when President Bush proposed them. I decry them today. They don't stimulate anything. I thought the jobs focus was undercited. 3.5 million jobs over 2 years, and an emphatic emphasis on that phrase, create or save, is a fraction of what we need. I think it was just a misguided sense of stimulus. I think we needed stimulus. I think we have to do another one. This time it has to be about jobs and then some jobs.
I'm Pat Malloy, and I salute you and the Senator Leo for your leadership and the New America Foundation. I'm a member of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. We did a hearing on March 24th looking at China's pillar industries, how China does have an economic strategy to move up the manufacturing and technology. And part of that strategy, as I can see it, and as we put up in that hearing, by the way, our website, www.uscc.gov. We're a congressionally funded think tank. But part of that strategy is to incentivize U.S. and other foreign corporations to move manufacturing and now R&D to China as they build their economy, and then our economy gets lesser as this process goes forward. And I'm wondering, Leo, have you thought about how we can re-incentivize our corporations in that kind of game that's being played?
For me to answer a comment about China to Pat Malloy is Coles to Newcastle. Let me just add one statistic to the points that Pat was making. 60% of China's exports are under the nameplate of a foreign company. They have been wonderfully successful in moving manufacturers from the United States and Europe to their shores and installing them as exporters out of China back to often their home countries. We're going to see it in airplane manufacturing here in spades. We've seen it modestly with the Boeing 737. As the quality of the capability rises, you'll see it across the entire Airbus and Boeing fleet. The fundamental premise here is that China has, and it very proudly has, its own manufacturing policy. Angela Merkel for Germany has, and proudly so, a manufacturing policy for Germany. We don't have a policy. We haven't had a policy except happenstantially since the 80s. And it's a loss. We can't We are not Liechtenstein. We can't resuscitate a 3,000-mile wide country by resuscitating a couple of streets in New York. It doesn't work. And all we're doing, in my opinion, and I think the senators and Sherrod's, is we are embedding the bubble to bubble to bubble practice that we've relied on now for 30 years. We can only fix this economy fairly or with another bubble. You got two choices.
Hi, my name is Julie Post. I'm from the Embassy of the Netherlands. I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit on how you'd like to see the United States manufacturing industry protected with regards to foreign trade.
I try not to use the word protection, but it's clear that I need to educate you to what I really think. We are absent a Buy America policy on wind turbines, as an example. Your country has one that favors manufacturers in the Netherlands for its wind turbines. I ask for nothing more than that. If it's good for the Netherlands, if it's good for China, it must be good for us. And you as a European nation of great success, have not been hesitant to take to your federal funding reasonable WTO allowed by Netherlands, by Germany, by France, by Britain policies. That's all we're suggesting in turn. I found it nothing but ironic that, as the senator commented, a tame Buy America provision was tacked on to the stimulus plan. The Chinese went completely ballistic and very publicly prided themselves on their Buy China policy last week, and didn't at one moment appreciate the hypocrisy of that. Trade is about fairness. It is about freeness, but it's also about fairness. It's just balance. We are not trying to alter anybody's comparative advantage. Their naturally gained comparative advantage. We're simply saying that there are illegal behaviors that are disallowed under WTO. Illegal subsidies are disallowed. They're not prosecuted. Subsidies, we have subsidies, you have subsidies. There are allowable subsidies and there are illegal ones. I'm concerned about the latter, and I'm concerned mightily about currency manipulation.
Other questions? Mike Lynn?
Thank you. A question for Leo.
I'm the only one left here.
Yeah, sure, I'll take. We've seen some success at the state level with industrial revenue bonds, the use of bond financing in order to give grants, low interest loans, and others to enterprises developing within a state. So far, most of the discussion of rebuilding manufacturing in terms of national policy has involved incentivizing onshoring through tax credits. But it just strikes me, and I'm wondering if it strikes you, that we have this disconnection. Most, if not all of the 50 states have an extremely sophisticated manufacturing and industrial policy in order to lure productive activities inside their borders, which go beyond tax cuts to payroll tax cuts, industrial revenue bonds, infrastructure banks, and so on. So what do we need to do to persuade these same federal legislators and federal officials who come from states that do all of these things that we're not supposed to even think of, that the United States can do profitably what many states do at the state level?
The person who should have answered that is Bernard Schwartz, who is the most knowledgeable person I know on the issue of infrastructure investment. He was here briefly and came by to say hi and then had to leave. Bernard is the architect of essentially a development bank idea based around federal guarantees for the kind of state infrastructure spending that we would like to see as a complement to federal in infrastructure investment spending. I would comment quickly that the jobless recovery that Sherrod talked about in his opening remarks is dooming recovery in the states. 47 states are in acute deficit out of 50. You have Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming being exceptions because of recent mineral and natural gas finds. 47 out of 50 states in America are broke today. There will be no recovery of their predicaments if the jobless recovery persists. And yet, to the earlier question, you will have soon declared that we're in recovery. But those 47 states, as would the 30 million Americans, will all argue otherwise. We're going to break right in two, but I know Cheryl and I are grateful, and the senator, who's just an amazing leader in this area, appreciates it as well. He needs a lot of help in the Congress to get this stuff through, and so those of you who are in the more active side of politics and awareness, I know he would be grateful for your support, whatever it might be, to his efforts. So thank you very much. Thanks to America and Cheryl and Mike and Daniel and everybody. So very grateful.
And thanks to you, Leo. And also I wanted to acknowledge Nico Kuvanis in the back, who took the lead in preparing our report on the jobless recovery, and Danny Mendel for organizing this event, and you for all coming. I hope you'll come to future events. We're going to have a major symposium on this topic in the fall, because I think it will become even more important as we proceed forward. Thank you.